This is Chapter 6 of Welcome to Terrorland, Muhammad Atta and the 9/11 Cover-Up in Florida by Daniel Hopsicker. Chapter 6 is titled Looking for Amanda. Our first stop in the search for Amanda Keller was at the Sarasota Herald-Tribune's local Venice bureau, where reporter Earl Kimmel helped break through the story of Atta's American Squeeze. We asked him if he had any clue about what had happened to her. Was she just a reluctant witness, or had she been frightened into silence? Kimmel knew a bit about recalcitrant witnesses. He found some strippers who would dance for Atta in a Sarasota strip joint, for example, but then encountered resistance from the strip joint's management when he wanted to ask them a few questions. Their response was to throw him out of the club. A dancer at the Cheetah Lounge in Sarasota also reported seeing one of the alleged terrorists at the strip club, Kimmel reported. Several other Cheetah employees, shown pictures of the men who trained in Venice, said they looked somewhat familiar. A club manager escorted a Herald Tribune reporter out of the club shortly afterward, saying the Cheetah had no comment. Maybe the manager didn't want publicity, but probably he didn't want these girls to talk because he'd been clued in on the need for secrecy. Whether the strippers had knowledge about Atta was fast becoming rhetorical. Kimmel said he had no idea where Amanda Keller was currently. He thought she'd left town. Wished us luck in finding her, and with a weak smile, let us know that if we did find her, he had a few questions he'd like answered too. Our next stop was Fantasies and Lingerie, where Amanda had worked as a private dancer. Like Cheetah's, it's just down the street from the Sarasota airport. It turned out to be a lockdown facility in a rundown strip mall. No windows, one door, locked. The only access was through an intercom. The manager told us to go away. He had no employees named Amanda, and no, he would not come out. Next, Kimmel's second story about Atta and Amanda included a brief phone interview he'd done with her. She was speaking to him from her mother's house in the northern Florida town of Lady Lake, said the article. In a telephone interview late Friday, Keller said she had met Atta through a friend and let him stay in the apartment with her and then boyfriend Garrett Metz because she felt sorry for him. She said authorities told her not to say anything at all about Atta, reported Kimmel. Garrett Metz is, or was, the hot guy Amanda met in Sarasota nightclub while with Atta. Kimmel's account contained the 11 words she said before lapsing into silence. I can't really discuss anything, she told him. I'm afraid I'll get in trouble. Amanda's mother had met Atta too. Keller's mother, Susan Payne, of Lady Lake, remembered Atta, Kimmel reported. I didn't like him. He just seemed strange, she said. We eventually lost count of the number of eyewitnesses who told reporters Atta creeped them out. Atta dressed in a casual yuppie fashion, said Amanda's mother. Her daughter told her he mostly kept to himself. Amanda had taken him in because she said he had nowhere to stay. She said, stray dogs, stray cats, stray people, she is always taught to help anybody out when they needed help, Payne said. A real humanitarian, we're sure, concerned with the children and every living thing. But since she'd also been, if only briefly, the girlfriend of a man with the blood of 3,000 innocent human beings on his hands, somebody should have been asserting the people's right to know here. But it's strange, nobody did. We eventually went looking for Garrett Metz, the studly boyfriend for whom Amanda dumped Atta for, only to discover that he'd been killed the previous summer in a car accident. We visited his last known address, a modest 2-bedroom ranch house in South Venice. There we met Garrett's younger brother, who remembered Amanda well. When your older brother's dating a stripper with pink to orange to dyed blonde hair, he let us understand that you tend to pay attention. Amanda and Atta even lived briefly, he said, with Garrett's family. We checked the neighbor and discovered several others who knew all about Amanda Keller and Muhammad Atta. In fact, one neighbor said the lady across the street still had Atta's dog. From her description, we recognized that she must be talking about the little dog who survived Atta's kitten-killing spree by hiding under a couch. Garrett's brother passed on the names of some of Amanda's girlfriends, Olivia, Angelina, Paige. They used to hang out together at a bar called Crawdad's Son on the Intercoast Canal, which weeds through Venice. We were puzzled when we couldn't find Crawdads listed in the phone book. Then we learned it had closed a year ago, and the owners had moved on to a new place called the Big Easy. On the chance that the clientele of Crawdads had followed the owners to their new place, we stopped by, and although it was only late afternoon, the bar was busy already, filled with a mix of prosperous-looking older men sipping whiskey, catered to by an attractive young waitstaff, busy killing the hour between 5 and 6. One young waitress we noticed had something shiny sticking out of her tongue, a diamond stud. We thought these could be Amanda's people. We struck up a conversation at the bar and several beers later had made contact with a blonde woman in her 20s named Lori, who had known Amanda. The only problem was she didn't want to talk about her. She gave her reason as for protecting her friend, who wants to be known as a terrorist girlfriend. It made certain sense. Still, privacy concerns and matters pertaining to 9/11 seemed clearly outweighed in the search for the killers of 3,000 people. So we drove up to Lady Lake, a smallish town tucked into the hill country of northern Florida. We thought we'd try to get in touch with Amanda's mother, Susan Payne, but the house had been abandoned. There was broken glass all over the driveway. Susan Payne had died months ago, a neighbor told us. Another daughter, Tammy, had moved away. On a sweltering hot August day that seemed to come right out of the movie Body Heat, we visited Amanda's former residence in the Venice area. We found another house that she had lived, this one on Minnesota Key near Northport, but it was too vacant. Then, in Port Charlotte, just to the south of Northport, we pulled up to another one of Amanda's former residences and got lucky. A man who was mowing the lawn in front of the house. He knew Amanda. Sure, his stepson had lived with Amanda 2 years ago, he said. He appeared not to have much use for either of them. He and his wife, the stepson's mother, were raising the stepson's 2 children. The stepson was something of an unfit parent. He couldn't tell us where the stepson was, but he knew he was no longer with Amanda. The stepson's living arrangements were currently fluid. We were grouped. It was time to review what we had already learned. We've read news accounts and in the process discovered another story about Amanda and Atta that had come out a week after the initial flurry of reports. We were amazed at what it contained. The Sarasota Herald-Tribune was reversing itself, though not through a retraction. Amanda Keller had not lived with Muhammad Atta, the paper now reported, but with another Muhammad. A Muhammad who somewhat previously escaped mention. The headline offered a clue to the contortion somebody was going through to offer this news to the world. This paper, as we have seen, was counting the ever-increasing number of terrorists said to have passed through Venice in its headlines. They were up to 5. 5th pilot trainee vanishes. Muhammad slept on her couch, a Venice woman says. Investigators have identified a 5th man of Middle Eastern descent who trained to fly in Venice, but they do not know if he was involved in the September 11th attacks because they can't find him. He told the people he lived with Venice earlier this year that he was moving to Paris, the paper reported. The man known as Muhammad stayed at Amanda Keller's unit in the Sandpiper apartment complex on Airport Avenue in April. Authorities would not release the man's full name, and Keller would not divulge it, citing instruction from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. There had been a 5th terrorist pilot in Venice, authorities were now asserting. By itself is not so surprising. There may have been dozens. His name was Muhammad, with an extra M in the middle. Strangely enough, the similarities between him and the terrorist ringleader didn't end with their similar names. The 2 Muhammads shared a lot of characteristics. Like Atta, who, as we've seen, told Amanda he was French, this new Muhammad also had a French connection of sorts. He said he was moving to Paris. Also like Atta, this other Muhammad had an icky personality. He would leer, Tammy Payne, Kelly's sister, told reporters. God, was he creepy. This other Muhammad's chief, and apparently only, salient characteristic seemed to be that he was not the Muhammad whose last name was Atta. Investigators recently asked Keller about the man's name because it appeared on a list of flight students at Venice area flight schools, said the story. They aren't sure whether he was among the 19 men who hijacked the jets that crashed into the Pentagon, the World Trade Center towers, and in rural Pennsylvania, but his training in Venice and his disappearance have attracted their attention because of 4 other men who authorities say trained in Venice to prepare for the attacks. So there was a second terrorist named Muhammad in Venice, but authorities wouldn't release his full name? Amanda Keller told reporters that she wouldn't either. The second Muhammad had vanished without a trace. But despite their vagueness on his identity, whereabouts, chronology, and participation in the 9/11 attacks, authorities knew one thing about him to be an absolute dead certainty. He wasn't the terrorist ringleader. It hadn't been Muhammad Atta waking up to pink hairs on his pillow in the morning. It was this other Muhammad. Even for a cover story, this one seemed a little thin. For an outright lie, it looked pretty bold. But, and here's the point, it didn't have to be fully thought out. It was for local consumption. It put to bed rumors about Muhammad Atta's American girlfriend. The local paper didn't question further. It was the way things were in Florida after the 9/11 attack. There had been some initial confusion, authorities admitted, but Amanda Keller herself was now available to clear it up. Keller said comments attributed to her in the Herald-Tribune on Saturday saying that Atta lived at her apartment were wrong. She said that it was an unidentified 5th man, also named Muhammad, that stayed in her home. In an interview at her mother's house, Keller wouldn't talk about the man who stayed on her couch. But she did say the attention that she received from police and the media has been unwelcome, as a lingerie model especially. Amanda was probably quite capable of dealing with unwanted attention. What to make of this fifth pilot theory? We found the whole story strange. Was it plausible that a half dozen people, had mistaken the man with the 1,000-yard stare whose picture had been seen everywhere around the world for someone else? We thought that a big clue was that the New York Times' own Sarasota Herald Tribune had pulled Earl Kimmel, who discovered the connection, off the story. Were there any other crucial 9/11 witnesses who had conspicuously changed their stories? As a matter of fact, there were. In fact, there were several striking examples right in, where else? Florida. Shuckham's Dive Bar in Fort Lauderdale was a requisite nautical theme, complete with life-size sharks on an ocean-colored wall. Muhammad Atta and two of his henchmen were drinking heavily there 6 nights before the attack. Reported Time, Newsweek, and Wire Service stories reprinted worldwide. The networks all had corresponded to go live from Shuckham's. FBI agents had shown up at Shuckham's just 12 hours after the attack. They showed employees, especially manager Tony Amos and bartender Patricia Idrisi, photos of the two men. Bartender Idrisi says FBI agents told her that they were on the plane and passed away. We were able to recognize both gentlemen, Amos told reporters. He identified in a photo bearing the name Muhammad underneath, who along with the two other men in each consumed at least several drinks. The guy, Muhammad, was drunk, Amos said. The two and another man got wasted. In his place, he said, drowning chicken wings and cranberry juice, Stolichnaya and orange juice, and Captain Morgan's spiced rum and Coke. Atta drank Stoli vodka for these 3 straight hours, remembered bartender Idrisi. The guy, Muhammad, was drunk. They were wasted. Idrisi said the men told her they wanted to eat but didn't like what was on the menu, so she sent them to a Chinese restaurant a few doors down. They were very rude, she said. They didn't want to pay the bill. When asked if they could afford a $48 bar tab, Atta's face had darkened. He pulled out a thick roll. You think I can't pay? I'm a pilot for American Airlines. I can pay my fucking bill. Atta and 2 of his buddies seemed to have gone out for a farewell bender at the seafood bar called Shuckham's, Newsweek reported. Atta drank 5 Stoli and fruit juices, while one of the others drank rum and Coke. For once, Atta and his friends became agitated, shouting curse words in Arabic, reportedly including a particularly blasphemous one that roughly translates as "fuck God." Time magazine put this way: it was at Shuckham's on September 8th that Muhammad Atta and Marwan al-Shehi did some pre-mass murder tippling. Atta drank vodka and orange juice, while al-Shehi performed rum and Cokes, 5 drinks apiece. One eyewitness interviewed at Shuckham's describes Atta as having something more than just an eerie presence. He was just kind of strange, because he was just staring, the woman told Brian Ross on NBC, and every time I'd walk in and out, he had the same look on his face, so God knows what was going through his mind. Now I guess we know what's going through his mind. He had a very intense-looking face, very intense-looking eyes. Along with the reports of heavy drinking, which were surfacing, the report was at odds with the portrait, the official story, that was beginning to emerge of the terrorist ringleader, raising questions about whether Atta was really a fanatic and puritanical Islamic fundamentalist, Wahhabi desert dweller, or just a guy who knows the importance of Stoli's authentic Russian heritage when you're letting the night unfold. Were they sure that he was an Islamic fundamentalist? Maybe Atta was Islamic Stolichnaya. Then a witness's conspicuous retraction came to the rescue of the official story. Night manager Amos changed his story. Muhammad Atta drank nothing stronger than cranberry juice that evening at the Shuckham's bar, Tony Amos now said. He was sitting quietly by himself. It had been Atta's companion, Marwan, and a third man that did all the drinking. Case closed. Everyone by this time had seen the brooding mugshot of Muhammad Atta, complete with unnerving icy stare. Is it all that plausible that Atta could be mistaken for someone else? For the teddy bear, Marwan? We wanted to ask Tony Amos, but when we stopped at Shuckham's, we discovered that neither he nor bartender Idrisi were there any longer. No one knew where they'd gone. The current bartender, before she realized she said too much, indicated their leave-taking had been somewhat 9/11 related. Amos and Idrisi had purchased tickets to the island of the lost witnesses, hopefully round trip. A week later, when the Los Angeles Times mentioned the night at Shuckham's in the story of the terrorist's final days, the reports of heavy drinking were gone. The story didn't even mention it. That same night, September 7th, down on the coast of Florida, Atta and al-Shehi went to Shuckham's Sports Bar in Hollywood along with a still unidentified third man. The owner, Tony Amos, says Atta sat quietly by himself and drank cranberry juice and played a video game, while al-Shehi and the other customer tossed back mixed drinks and argued. Why did the restaurant manager change his story? We read carefully through the detailed early accounts of this incident and were left, as we suspect you are, with a startling conclusion. The manager's retraction was coerced because the two employees' initial remembrances of the encounter were just too full of vivid details. Amos said they had chicken wings and stoli, Captain Morgan spiced rum and coke. He said Muhammad was drunk. His voice was slurred. Bartender Idrisi recalls how many drinks, about 5 each down, and said Atta paid her with a $100 bill from a thick wad but left only a $3 tip. Bartenders remember things like that. Stories of the terrorist ringleader's two-fisted drink habits, we will be hearing more, led inevitably to doubts about an official narrative which insisted that all the villains who attacked defenseless civilians and broke the hearts of Americans were cave-dwelling religious fanatics who had been cast out of their own society. Well, what if they weren't? After all, it's not as if the Shuckham story was the only drinking incident. There were many. The London Sunday Mail, to cite just one example, reported Atta and al-Shehi spent $1,000 in 45 minutes on Krug and Perrier Jouet champagne at Palm Beach bar called 251 Sunrise. Marwan was with a short blonde, said the paper, while Atta was with a 6-foot-tall, busty brunette in her late 20s. This has the ring of truth. Sidekicks don't get to pick first. The Mail report both of the women were known locally as regular companions of high rollers. Are there any Islamic fundamentalist high rollers? If the truth can be so easily manipulated as in the incident at Shuckham seems to show, then inconvenient knowledge about the hijackers might contain information that would force a reappraisal of just who, in fact, our enemy was. What remained were sanitized reports, like the September 22nd Washington Post report that the Friday night before the attacks, Atta and 2 other men, one of them another suspected hijacker, Marwan al-Shehi, spent 3.5 hours at a sports bar in Hollywood, Florida called Shuckham's. Atta played video games, a pursuit of line with fundamentalist beliefs, but the manager on duty that night has said that he doesn't recall seeing Atta drink alcohol. Were we witnessing evidence of a federal cleanup crew in action? Were they scrubbing down Florida and sanitizing the public record of inconvenient knowledge? We knew one thing. We still wanted to find Amanda Keller, because the 5th pilot was the unknown terrorist. His entire existence, for the record, consisted of his stay with Amanda. There were no follow-up stories about him. No 5th pilot identified headlines. Even his name remained a mystery. He was Muhammad, no last name. He went totally unmentioned in later in-depth news accounts about the Hamburg cadre's key members. He was a man who was not there. After serving the purpose of disabusing the public of the notion that Muhammad Atta had lived with Amanda Keller in March and the April of 2001, he retired from earthly existence, was immediately forgotten, and has never been mentioned again by the press or authorities. Except for Amanda Keller saying in her retraction, there was absolutely no evidence that he had ever existed at all. And yet this transparent ruse was somewhat strangely successful in keeping the press from going after the story. The part that really hurts is not so much that they took us for fools and get away with it, it's that they might be right. We made a new rule of thumb. When the FBI identifies someone with only one name, don't believe anything they say. And we continued to search for Amanda Keller and finally got the break we'd been hoping for. On our 3rd or 4th phone call to the police chief of Lady Lake, seeking information on Amanda and her family, he turned us over to Debbie, the department's detective in charge of juvenile and child welfare cases. Debbie already knew quite a bit about Amanda. She had known her and her family as well. Police had been called out to their place regularly. They had been involved in a lot of domestics. Despite only being 21, Amanda Keller had 2 children. Debbie stated, she divorced from the 2 children's father. He had her Baker acted, which meant she was declared a threat to herself and not a fit parent. There had been a court fight, the result of which was that Steve Keller, the father, won custody of the 2 toddlers. Amanda had been drinking and had drug problems. For that matter, so had her husband. Amanda's mother, Susan Payne, died 3 months after September 11th, sometime in December. After attending her funeral, Amanda abducted her 2 children from the parent with lawful custodial care and fled the state, Debbie stated. She took her children to a maternal aunt's house in a large Midwestern state and turned herself into the state authorities there. Custodial arrangements were now being worked out by jointly by the 2 states. Amanda was working to put her life together, Debbie told us. She was sober. She was in a stable living environment. Amanda's aunt was involved. She and her husband had been 2 immature kids with babies. She said, Amanda had absolutely no parenting skills at the time and was from a family where there were no parenting skills. The situation was being monitored, Debbie stated. Would we like the aunt's phone number? We made an unsuccessful attempt to sound nonchalant. Yes, please, we replied. That would be nice.